Okay, in this week's Weather Extra, we're going to use one of the prettiest visualizations of the Earth and the climate system to tell a story that may not be all that pretty for next winter's rainfall here in California. We're looking at a map of the sea surface temperatures on the globe. Blue shows you where sea surface temperatures are cooler than average. Red shows you where they are above average. And if you're familiar at all with El Nino or La Nina, perhaps your eyes have already been driven to the point that matter most on here. That big pool of cool air along the equator, cool sea surface temperatures, I should say, right off the coast of South America. First, just a quick refresher on La Nina, El Nino, what they do, and why they matter so much if you are concerned about long-range projections for how a particular winter might go. Got both examples set up here. A La Nina, which we've just looked at, shows you the cooler than average sea surface temperatures along the equator, and El Nino is the opposite, where you've got warmer than average sea surface temperatures along the equator. If you followed along with any of this over the last several years, you're probably far more familiar with El Nino as being one of the better indicators for how winters here in California can sometimes end up wetter than average. When you have a warm pool of sea surface temperatures along the equator like that during an El Nino, that tends to redirect the storm track globally in such a way that it tends to bring wetter than average winters to California. And on the flip side of that, La Nina does the opposite. Not that they do this exactly one way or the other, but they do flip the odds heavily in favor one way or the other. And if we just generalize what La Nina typically tends to bring to California, while it's not a guarantee, you can see the pattern that tends to set up. The storm track kind of gets bumped up a little too far north. The Pacific Northwest tends to get rainier than it already is. And California, in general, tends to get drier than it already is. It's kind of like an exaggeration of what you think of the climate for both regions being in a typical winter, only you bump more rain for them and you make California drier. The last two winters here at home were both La Ninas, and you probably don't need a reminder on the situation of the current drought. And the last two winters have been the primary driving factors behind digging us into the deep territory in the drought, which we are now in. And this is the current drought monitor, by the way. You can see the shades of here going into red and deep red, parts of the state which are in extreme or exceptional drought. And this map is no doubt going to be shading redder over the next several months because we're already in the dry time of year. So it puts high hopes on next winter to help us out with that. However, knowing what we now know about the way the sea surface temperatures are setting up out in the Pacific, there's reason to be a little concerned for next winter. We've had two La Ninas in a row. That's only happened 8 times since we've been keeping records on these things. Each one of these lines on here shows you where we had 2 La Ninas in a row and where that La Nina ended up on its 3rd year. So you've got the first 2 years over here, both lines for each one of those 8 years dipping well into the cooler than average sea surface temperatures. These were all La Ninas here, 8 times, only 8 times that it's happened. And then over here, it resolves into what the 3rd year in each one of those 8 double dip La Ninas looked like. Some of them turned into El Ninos. In fact, more often than not, the 3rd year either went El Nino or it went neutral, except for 2 of them. And you can see the deep blue lines over here show you the only 2 times in the last 50 years that we've actually gone into a triple dip, which is actually a term climate scientists use to describe this. Can you see the black line on there? That black line is us so far at this point, showing the progression of where we are in relation to the last 8 times we've done this. And perhaps more importantly, to the last 2. We're already farther into the La Nina territory at this point in the year than either of those 2 triple dips were. Doesn't mean we have to follow that path, but in looking at the statistics that we have available to us, the odds are starting to look a little more concerning that perhaps we're heading for a triple dip La Nina. Now, the other thing to throw in here is the terminology of the spring barrier. As helpful as La Nina is or El Nino is for us to gauge what that next winter is going to look like, You cannot really even start looking at this until you get past spring, because it's notorious in the climate models, you can't gauge what La Nina or El Nino is going to do till you get past spring. Well, here we are. We just hit the summer solstice. We're just emerging from the spring barrier. So at least the signs are there for us to look at. It's early. This could still change. But considering how much is riding on this next winter, and that we're starting to get the earliest projections available to us now to let us know if we're looking at perhaps a third La Nina, and with the odds starting to look that way, it's at least worth starting to look at this now. We'll have another look at this as we get towards the fall. We've got a very busy summer ahead of us. We're just entering fire season. We're going to be very distracted with a lot of other things. But we'll revisit the ENSO outlook, El Nino Southern Oscillation, when we get to fall, and hopefully we'll have a better story by then. That's this week's Weather Extra. Paul Hagen will be in next week with another.